Welcome back to Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast, where we're going to continue to bring life experiences from others in hopes that you will connect to start the journey to healing. Today, I want to welcome Annie Joe Carter to Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast. And we can't wait to share her life experience. Annie, thank you for being a guest today. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so grateful that you have this platform to help more women speak up because I think the more we talk about this stuff, the better it gets. So thank you for doing what you do.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, can you give us an introduction about yourself, Annie? We just can't wait to hear.
For sure. Okay. So I'm Annie, and I actually grew up in Utah, but I've lived in Arizona for about 14 years now. I'm a single mom and I have two kids. I'm a life coach and a speaker, and I also MC at conferences, which is probably my favorite thing to do. It's very fun. But I mostly teach people about how to be kind to yourself so you can be kind to others because from the things I've experienced, I want more women to be able to speak up for themselves in a way that's respectful to them and other people, but to speak up and to say the things they want to say because I spent way too many years being quiet, being silent, and not speaking up for myself. And that's on me. That's my journey to figure out and to how to be better about that. And so now I love being able to help other women to do the same thing.
No, I hadn't started.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for joining us today, Annie. We do appreciate you coming on. So with everybody we interview, we do always start at the beginning. So let us know what life was like, growing up. What was your home structure like? Did you experience any traumas as a child? Just fill us in on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question because I do think that there is patterns that come up in our life, right? And so and I've gone through a lot of trauma coaching and trauma therapy and lots of things and trying to draw those parallels to like why was I even drawn to this type of relationship? And so I think that's a very valid question you ask people because I do think it relates to it. And I know that my parents did the best with what they knew how to do. And I think that's what all parents do is they do the best with what they know how to do. But that being said, they definitely didn't have tools to like honor emotions and to hold boundaries. They didn't have these tools. They didn't know about how to deal with such an emotional person. Like I have big feelings, big ones, and my daughter has big feelings. And now I get to parent her differently because I know what it's like to have big feelings. And so when I was younger and and this big dramatic intense kid, and I'm sure my parents were like, what do we do with her? I'm the first girl in my family as well. And so I'm sure it was daunting for them to have these like rambunctious boys and then this girl coming hot with like big feelings. And, I got called dramatic all the time as a kid. I was told I was too loud. I was too much. I was too opinionated and just slow down, stop talking constantly. And I do remember having like there was trauma and things going on in my childhood. I don't think my parents meant to do that. I have a lot of forgiveness for them because I know that they did the best that they could and they just didn't know how else to handle things. That's how they were modeled to handle things. So that's how they handled things. And but I do remember feeling very shut down and silenced as a kid as well. And like literally being told, like, just stop talking. And I didn't obviously have the tools as a little kid to be like, oh, that's their stuff. Like that's their opinion, right? It's like, no, I just swallowed it hook, line, and sinker that like I'm too much, I'm too loud. And then I interpreted that to mean that I'm not lovable. And then I would do all these things to try to prove my lovability. I was a way overachiever and was in all these extracurricular activities. I had a 4.0. I was on drill team. I was in choir. I was in debate. I was in a dance team. I was in a play. Like I did all these things to try to show and prove, like, look how great I am. Like somebody noticed how great I am. And I just wore myself out. I was so tired.
Oh wow, that is a lot as a child. So, sinking into school, you're told you're too loud, you're told you're dramatical, and it seems like you took that energy and put it into the curricular activities in school. But what kind of pressure or emotions did that do to you?
It's a good question. So I think that the pressure I felt constantly was, and also I want to acknowledge that like my bare needs were met, right? Like I had a home, I had food, like my parents were around. Like I acknowledge that I had those things, and not every child has that, right? Not every child like has a steady home or like has food in their kitchen, right? Like I know that there were definitely like blessings that I had as a child that I also couldn't have acknowledged at that point either because I didn't know any different. As an adult, I'm like, well, there certainly were things that were okay, right? But my emotional needs were definitely not being met. And that's its own type of trauma. There's other trauma that's involved with like your physical needs not being met, right? But that wasn't my experience. I had physical needs met, but my emotional needs weren't being met. And that the pressure of like being perfect, being as good as whoever, like for me with my brothers were always put on this pedestal of like, well, your brother would never do that. Well, your brother would never do that. And like, look at your brother. He's so great. And it's like, cool. I get he's great. But like, I'm not like him. And it didn't feel like I could be different than someone else and still be good. And I get this is also my child logic, right? Like as a kid, I don't know how else to describe like, well, I'm hearing all these messages and all I can interpret from that is I'm not good enough and I'm never going to be good enough. And I really believed as a kid, like if my mom doesn't love me, which I know is not true, but at the time I felt like if my mom doesn't love me, how can anybody else love me? And so I would seek out like unhealthy relationships with men from the age of like 14. I was trying my very hardest to like get guys' attention because I was trying so hard to like fill this hole inside of me that felt like I wasn't lovable. But I didn't want to believe that because who wants to believe that, right? Like who wants to think that way? And it doesn't feel good. So I tried everything I could to like impress my parents and seek out any guy that was interested whatsoever because I just wanted to believe it so badly. And I was seeking it outside of myself. Up until my adulthood, I was seeking it outside of myself.
Okay, gotcha. So, with that being said, were there any, I guess, actual interactions, the way that your parents interacted with each other? Did that form any, of the way you were kind of moving through life or what you were looking for in relationships, or what exactly was the dynamic between your parents? Was it overly submissive? Was your mom really strong-headed, argumentative? Was your dad submissive? Like, how was that part of it all, and how did that structure things in your life?
You guys have great questions. I love that. So yeah, I think that did play a role too, because my parents, again, for lack of tools that they have never had a great marriage, and they're still together. But they're not kind to each other, and they're not emotionally supportive of each other, and they're not a team. I've never seen them be like kind and loving and like work as a team together. My mom is very strong and opinionated. And in some ways, I admire that in her. And like in some ways, I love that she's a fierce mama bear and that she gets it done, but she is more the dominant, louder one in the relationship. And my dad is a little more passive in that. And again, not that like either one of them are bad people. Like they're both wonderful people. They just both grew up in a way that this was how their parents acted in their marriages. And that's what they brought with them. But yeah, I never saw them be kind, and I never saw them work through a solution. Even now, like if they argue about something, I'm like, I don't want to be any part of this. Like this is just triggering for me. I feel like I'm right back to being a little kid again. I feel out of control. I feel helpless. I feel trapped, that the adults are arguing and screaming at each other or whatever. And I feel like, I don't feel safe. So as you're arguing again, I'm still not feeling safe. And I get that's my work to do, right? To like take care of me not feeling safe because I'm the grown up now. And now I can take care of my emotions and my feelings. But it does start to trigger again when they keep arguing and like fight with each other. Cause I'm like, whoa. You are not modeling in any way, shape, or form how to work through a problem. So of course I wouldn't know how to work out a problem in my own marriages because I've been married twice. And if I ever get married again, I hope it's the last time. But I haven't been able to have that model for me. So how would I know? How would I know what it looks like to work through a problem and to like be a teammate? I don't actually know. So I've had to seek it outside of myself, like getting my degree in psychology and becoming a life coach and reading all these books and trying to teach myself something different because that's not what I was shown my whole childhood.
Wow. And I tell folks too, I'm like, what we see as a child is an emotional impact into our adulthood. So it definitely, our parents' actions actually can traumatize us through life watching them argue or fuss or fight. They don't realize the impact that it has on us as children into our adult life. Um, I was gonna ask, you said you started dating at 14. So what you seen from your parents? Were you trying to do the opposite in your relationships with others? Was it more of a people pleasing form?
Again, great question. I think that I don't think I even thought about that before, but I think that in those, I probably did. I mean, I know that I stepped into people pleasing for sure for a very long time. I'm a recovering people pleaser. I sometimes still step into it and I'm like, whoa, let's not do that. But I think that I did become fairly passive in some of the things that were going on because I didn't like my parents' dynamic. And so I didn't want to be like super headstrong and like pushing like my mom does. And I also didn't really want to be passive like he is either. But I feel like I still kind of took a back seat to like what was happening because all of my relationships, even at 14, were abusive. And I didn't know what that meant back then. I didn't understand like what was a healthy boundary. I had no idea. So when I had this first boyfriend who was doing things that were very inappropriate and like forcing them on me, and I felt again like trapped. I felt like I couldn't get out of it. And I've had to do a lot of work around like letting go of all the hate and anger I had towards that 14-year-old girl who, like, I was mad at myself. Like, why didn't I just push him away? Or why didn't I do this? Or why didn't I do this? And realizing it was like, because I right back to being in this like trapped place. Like, oh, I have no choice. I'm helpless in this. I know now I wasn't helpless, but at the time I felt helpless. I felt like I couldn't get out of the things he was doing. And he would say and do these things that were so twisted, but it'd be like maybe partially kind of true. And so I would buy it. I'm like, oh yeah, he must be right, and I would feed into it, and I would think that he was God's gift because he's interested in me. So I've got to keep his interest. So I'll do whatever it takes to keep his interest, even if that means that I'm losing me and I'm losing what I want and I'm losing what matters to me. I mean, do I even know at 14 what I want? Not necessarily, but I know I don't want to feel unsafe. And I didn't feel safe that entire relationship, but I didn't know how to say those words. I didn't know how to say, hey, when you do this, this, and this, I feel unsafe. Can you please stop that? I had no idea how to say that. No clue. So even at that one, and then, throughout the rest of my like teenage years and into adulthood, my relationships were very, what do I got to do to keep you interested? Because if you leave, then it's true. Then it's true that I'm not lovable. So to try to prove the lie wrong, I'm going to keep you here. So I was going about it in like the most unhealthy way. I wanted to like make them stay to prove that I'm okay. Instead of figuring out that like I'm okay, I just wanted them to prove I'm okay.
I call that a vulnerability of love. That's what I went through. So people are like, I never phrased it like that, but it's a vulnerability of love. We feel when it comes to the love piece of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Sorry, it's working with a delay. Once I press it, it doesn't look like I pressed it. Okay, but I'm here. We good. Okay, so do you also think that just from something you said a little bit earlier, just how parents would use the kind of standard of comparison, do you also believe kind of that wedge between brother and sister also, contributed to, your choice of men. Because for me, it was like, I had a dad, definitely. He didn't really have a part in actually raising me. So my like modicum of cool guy was my older brother. And I would take cues off of the girls that they talked about, or the things that they were interested in and things like that. So that used to be my kind of gauge, for acceptance in a sense. So did the wedge your parents were kind of driving between, you as siblings kind of affect, choices, or, your aptitude for people pleasing as well? Or, were you even trying to be in kind of your brother's good graces? Like, what was you guys' relationship, outside of how your parents had you kind of, at odds?
Yeah, so I do think that there is some dynamics that play into that as well, with like some of the comparison things. And I think a lot of parents do this, like not recognizing what impact it has on children, right? I think I even see parents nowadays will say things in comparison to their other siblings, and it's just ignorant. They just don't know like what that does to kids. But I do think that there was some like comparison competition like between my siblings, and sometimes we still have those dynamics once in a while. And I actually remember, so I was frustrated feeling like, I'm being compared to my brothers. But then I have a younger sister who told me, as an adult, told me she felt frustrated feeling like she was being compared to me. That she would say, well, I'm not Annie, because she's much more quiet and reserved. Her and I are very different in our personality types. And she's like, I'm not bubbly like Annie. That's not who I am, And so she felt that dynamic too. So it's like, oh, it wasn't just me feeling that way. And I do think that when we feel disconnected in our family, it's going to be hard to find that connection in other people, because that's our main place. Like studies even talk about, our primary socialization is home. Like school's a big one for socialization, but home's like your number one. So if you're not getting those, like learning how to connect and how to build those relationships at home, it is going to be tricky to learn how to do it somewhere else. And so I love my siblings, and I'm close to several of them, but I do think that there is dynamics that I wish were better, and that, and they could be better if I tried harder. But like, I know that that is a factor in all of it too, that just every opportunity we have to build a relationship is an opportunity to learn those tools and learn those skill sets. And yeah, I didn't totally get that all the time when I'm feeling like I have to compete with my siblings. And so, yeah, I do think that plays a role in it too.
And this is so perfect because I wrote down my next question while you were talking, and this is chiming right into what we're talking about now. And I was going to ask, comparing you and your brother, how did that make you feel socially? And did you feel compared with your friends, like you had to be better, or if they thought that you were better?
Yeah, so my maiden name is Housekeeper, so it's a very unique last name. And so my oldest brother, like everybody just loved him. My other brother's like a star basketball player. Like my high school, it was, they were like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they were like heroes on campus, right? Like everybody loved them, and their nickname was House. And so then I get to high school and I was Little House because I was the little sister of these like great American heroes, whatever. Like they're these awesome people and everybody loves them. And I did step right into high school feeling like I had to fill their shoes. I had to be as cool as them or as fun as them. And I even tried to run for student council several times to try to be like my brother, who, he was on student council throughout high school and was really popular. And I like never made it to student council. Like that was never a thing. And I remember feeling so sad about it, not necessarily because that's what I wanted, but because I was trying to be like him. And I was trying to be like as cool as him. And I wanted to be as popular as him, as liked as he was. Because even now, I mean, my brother's, has 7 children and is, a grown adult, but he still is very liked by so many people just because he's a kind and warm person. So people are drawn to him and they like him. But now I don't feel that competition with him because I just like him too. He's a great person and I like being around him. But as a kid, I just wanted to be like him. And then when I couldn't be like him, then it just, again, reaffirmed those like core beliefs of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable because I'm not like Chris and everybody loves Chris. So if I'm not like him, then I must be dysfunctional in some way and like not worthy of love.
Understood. Definitely understood. Now, were there any particular instances with any of these relationships you found yourself in, as a teen or young adult? Were there any particular standouts that you look back and you can kind of really feel how dangerous it was, or what things like would have been like had you kind of stayed in it, or were there any ones at the top of your brain that kind of caused you damage the most, in regards to men that you've chosen or relationships you've chosen?
Yeah, there's so many stories and there've been so many relationships. So I always will say a previous relationship because then I'm not specifying which one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm certainly not here to like, tell anybody else's story, right? But there were definitely times in a previous relationship where I was really scared, and um, there were times when cops were called, and there was police involvement a couple of times in one of them, and at the time I was so numbed out that I didn't fully understand what danger I was in. And who knows, like maybe nothing would have happened, but the fact that something could have happened should have scared me more than it did, but I was numb. Like there was an experience that we had that I can't share details about, but there was police involvement and it was really scary and hard. And I remember like I walked away from the house because like my therapist had told me like you need to walk away, like you can't be involved in it. And so I walked away and I called my best friend and I said, here's what happened. And I told her in kind of this like monotone voice, like, oh, just like reading a grocery list, just like told her, here's the thing that happened. And she's like, Annie, back up. You have to call the police. I was like, oh, no. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can do that. She's like, you have to. I'm like, I know, because what if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm making it up? And then it escalates even further and it gets even worse. I can't run that risk. And I remember her like trying to talk me through, like, no, this is not okay. This is not safe. And I later on, when I like went back to it and like did some trauma work around this experience, it was like a delayed response of like, I was holding my breath for like a year after this had happened. And then when I finally sat down with the therapist to talk about like what it was and what it meant for me and like how unsafe I felt, like it just exploded out of me. Like I was sobbing, like I couldn't. But it was so interesting because in that moment, I was just in a freeze response. My trauma response was to freeze and just hold my breath and just like wait for it to go. Like I think my body wanted to just like stand in the background and like hope it went away. Just, oh, if I just stand here and they don't see me, then it's going to go away. Obviously that didn't just go away, but that's what my body did. And I remember I just talked recently with a gal who does like trauma certification. And we talked about some of these experiences. I've had multiple experiences where like I felt unsafe. My body kind of froze. And she told me, your body did exactly what it needed to do. Like you have to trust that that's what your body needed and that was the appropriate response. And so now you get to like work through that and heal that and work forward. But at that time, that's what your body knew to do. So you have to trust your body. That's what it did. And that's okay. And so I've had to work through like how unsafe I felt in those moments and how numb I was in those moments. Because talking about it now, I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I doing? Like, why did I not run for the hills the second it started? But it's because I was numb. I was so thick in years and years and years of like, he can't leave. He can't leave. He can't leave. I have to make him stay. And so I got so numbed out to like all the behaviors they had because it was survival mode. I couldn't let him leave.
So I want to go. So into your adulthood, was it abusive relationship after abusive relationship, or you trying to any relationship that you got in, you people please, and then it turned into abuse? It was a rejection issue of just letting go and saying I can't deal with the whatever traumatic was happening in that situation, and what was the break to leave the situation?
Okay, so my first one at 14, what was the break to leave? That's a really good question. I think that I'm trying to remember, it was so long ago. Oh, I remember. He was breaking up with me because there was drama with my family, like legal issues with my family, that it wasn't my brother's fault, but there was things that were like accusations, I should say accusations, legal accusations against a family member of mine, and he couldn't be associated with that. So he told me, like, I can't be associated with your family. And what's so funny is that I was upset. I was so upset that he rejected me, because it wasn't that I like wanted to be with him. Like, if I was really honest with myself, why don't I be with this guy? He's not treating me well. But it's because he's my safety net for trying to stop believing the lie. Like, he was my Band-Aid for I'm not lovable. So then he took the Band-Aid away, and then I'm right back to crap, I'm not lovable. You know? And so when he's telling me, like, I can't be around you, and I remember, like, the only fight that me and my oldest brother ever got in, ever in our lifetimes. I mean, I'm 40 years old. We've only gotten one fight our whole life. And it's because I said my boyfriend broke up with me, and I'm bawling. And he's like, why do you care? Like, why would you even care he broke up with you? And I was like, you're a jerk. And I ran upstairs and I like locked myself in my room. I mean, this is how nice he is. Like, that's the only fight we got in. He's like, why do you care? And then he came in, he's like, Annie, I'm only saying that because you're so much better than him. Like, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I love you. That was our only fight. So I'm so upset because it's revealing my real truth is what I'm saying to myself. Like, well, then the real truth is no one can love me. And then my next relationship wasn't until I was in college, because after that I was like, oh, I don't do boyfriends. No, thank you. I mean, so I sought attention from guys constantly, but as soon as it got close to like having a relationship, I'm like, no, thanks. I don't do boyfriends. Boyfriends are awful. Boyfriends hurt you. Like, that's what I believe. Boyfriends hurt you. So I'm not going there, but I still want the attention. So I'm still going to play with your attention because I want that to try to cover the, the wound, but not enough for you to like get too close to me. So then I didn't have another relationship until I was like 20 years old. I think I was 20, and it was also abusive, and it wasn't great from the get-go, but again, it was like, well, someone's interested. So therefore, maybe I am lovable. So I'm going to take any interested human, because why not? And I mean, he had some great qualities. It's like he wasn't a good person. It wasn't even like a good match. It just was convenient to have someone interested. And so that one ended because he lived in another state and we couldn't like navigate the long distance thing. And then he came out to visit me and we were going to get married. Like, I had a ring, we had a date. It was June 3rd, supposed to get married on June 3rd. And he came out to visit me. It was like, I don't know, maybe we need to wait a little bit to get married. I was like, well, maybe. He's like, well, let's just sleep on it. And then while he's visiting me, he made out with my roommate. And I was like, well, then I guess we're done. That's not going to work out for me. Oh, so your break was so you can make out with my roommate, like in my house. Cool. Thank you for that. So that's why that one ended.
Whoa! So you and this girl continued to be roommates after he slept with her?
We were not roommates for very much longer after that, because I ended up moving out after probably like another month or two. But he left. I ended up moving out eventually. But yeah, he wanted to like slow down the engagement, but like not break up, just like slow down the engagement. And then, yeah. So, I mean, I'm not friends with that girl to this day. Like, I
How
wish her
could you live
well.
in the same household for a whole month after? Oh gosh, I don't know if I would have made it.
Well, I just stayed away from the house a lot. And anyway, actually, I had another roommate. This was part of my petty phase. I moved past this, but in my petty phase, we kept playing the song She's a Hoe in our house. It was really petty. We shouldn't have done that. That wasn't kind. But that's how we handled it back then, was like every time she came in the house, we'd play that song, and it was not a good idea. But
well, got your point across.
not a good plan. So that guy ended, bless his heart. My first marriage was the only one that I really like said, I'm leaving. He tried to get me to stay several times, but I was like, no, the abuse and the lies and like all the things he was doing just were too much. So I did end up like filing the paperwork. And then this last one, semi-mutual, like I put order of protection in place. He responded with divorce papers. But I mean, I was planning to file them anyway. So it was a little bit more like mutual ending of like, this isn't working anymore. And we got to just move on for the sake of our children. So that one was a little bit more like we both were like, and we're done.
Absolutely. Now, did you notice at the time of when you were saying, I don't do relationship type thing, did that work at all? Did you spare yourself from any hurt realistically now that you're looking back on it?
No, that is such a valid question. No, it did not. It did not help anything because I still wasn't addressing the actual problem. Like I didn't address the problem. Honestly, I didn't actually address it until after my second divorce. So after my first divorce, I did go to therapy and I worked on some things, and my therapist kicked me out. He was like, you could be a therapist. You're fine. Go home. Like you're done. Like he wrapped it up with me. But I don't think that trauma therapy was really like a thing back then. It really wasn't as popular as it is now. And we didn't really dive into like my trauma patterns and didn't really dive into like, why did I even stay with this guy to begin with? Like, why did I not walk away date one, And we didn't really get into that. And so I had done some work, but not enough. And so then when I got divorced again, I was like, man, I'm the common denominator somehow because I got divorced again. So there's something I'm doing that's not working. And that's when it finally hit me of like, why am I allowing this? Like, this is my responsibility of who I allow into my life. And it's because of how I treat myself. I don't think I'm better than anything else because this is how I'm treating myself. If I'm treating myself like garbage, why wouldn't I let them treat me like garbage? Like that's exactly what I'm familiar with and I'm comfortable with. And so the past 4 years have been this like deep dive into learning how to genuinely love who I am, speak kindly to myself, even when I screw up or make mistakes. And please bless, I'm not perfect at it by any stretch, but like I would write love notes to myself. I would like consciously work on my narrative inside my head because I'm the only one who can change that. And yeah, I can go to bajillions of hours of therapy and it's wonderful. Like having the outside support is so good. But at the end of the day, no one is coming to save me. I am my own hero and no one's coming to save me. I save me. I change my patterns.
Love it. I was going to ask, and I don't know because you went through 2 abusive marriages. For the first one, are you okay to talk about some of the abuse that you went through in the marriage?
Yeah, I really have no contact with him. So the one with my children's dad, there is contact. And so I feel like for the sake of honoring that relationship, I can't share too many details about that one. But the first one, and again, I will say, like, I have forgiven him. I have forgiven myself because I know that an unhealthy marriage does take 2 people. Granted, I think a lot of his behaviors were far more unhealthy than mine, but I contributed to the unhealthiness. Absolutely. I would never say like, well, they're the problem and I didn't do anything wrong. I would never say that because I don't think that's true. But I think that my first husband had a lot of mental health issues that weren't really being addressed. And mine weren't really being addressed in the beginning of that marriage either. It wasn't until kind of after I left that marriage, I really started going to therapy like intensely. So I know there's some mental health issues for sure, but like he had, and this wasn't like diagnosed, but he definitely was like a pathological liar. Like he lied about so many things and he would like make up jobs and pretend he had jobs and like forged paychecks and got fake cell phones and like wrote bad checks to stores. Like he was doing all kinds of things to cover up that he wasn't actually working, and would lie to me about all these things that he was doing. He had me drop him off at a office, quote unquote office, that wasn't his office. And I drove him there for weeks before I was like, something feels off here. Like this doesn't. So I'd call and investigate. Turns out the job wasn't real. So then he'd do another one. And I'm like, I need to see a paycheck. So he'd fake a paycheck. And then I'd find out that one wasn't real. And then he'd do another one. And there was just this constant like fake life he was living. To this day, I could not tell you what he was doing all day. Like, I don't know where he actually was when he was supposed to be working. I don't know. And I feel bad for him, because I feel bad that he didn't feel safe enough in his own body to like talk to someone and say, I don't know how to find a job, or I don't feel like I could find a job, or whatever it was going on with him. I wish he could have felt safe enough to say, I have a problem and I need help. Because he didn't. He just kept lying and just kept making things up. And he had a porn addiction, and he had a tobacco chewing addiction, and he had all these things that were like numbing out or like escaping. I even think some of the like fake jobs and stuff was also a way for him to escape. I'll never know for sure, right? Because I haven't spoken to him in years. I have no need to. We don't have children together. I actually miscarried twice in that marriage. And at the time, it was really difficult because I wanted to be a mom so badly, and I was aching for that. But then I remember having this moment and like talking to God about it and being like, I want to be a mom, but this marriage is a nightmare. So there's no like good solution here. So can you please just help me have the strength to do whatever it is that you need me to do? And I remember that was the moment I finally felt peace in those miscarriages of like when before I miscarried, of like, it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. I've got you. And so I remember thinking like, okay, whatever the outcome is, I'm going to be okay. So I did end up miscarrying both of those babies. I was very early in, like 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks maybe. And so I left that marriage and realizing that while that was difficult, I have no ties to him whatsoever. And I have not talked to him. I mean, it's probably been 15 years that I've talked to him, and I have no need to. And so, which was kind of nice too, because it allowed me the space and grace to like look back at the relationship, realize where I had an issue. And he also cheated. I forgot. There's so many things in that marriage. He also cheated on me like 3 months in. That was the very first thing he did, was he cheated on me. And then he had another like emotional, like sexting affair with somebody else later on too. And so like there was so much pain in that marriage. So then coming out of it and looking back and like having compassion for this person is hurting so much. He is so wounded. He's in so much pain, and he took it out on me, and I was in pain, and I took it out on him. Like I did not handle things well. Like when I find out something, I would lose it and be like, what are you doing? And I didn't handle it in a kind way. And I mean, understandably so, right? Like, excuse me, you're cheating on me. Like, I'm not happy about that. But I recognize that I contributed to that problem too. And I contributed to like the problems of our marriage and like not communicating well. And so, yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare, that one.
Absolutely. I can imagine. That sounds like it triggering even. But did you, let me see, where was I at? I had it while you were talking. I apologize. I lost it. That's amazing. Okay. We'll just reroute that. Now with that relationship in particular, was it one of those things, like did you meet family? Like what were the things you know, I guess maybe wish you would have looked into more? Maybe to confirm who this man actually was. What were really the biggest kind of
like the red
your
flags.
biggest hindsight of that relationship?
Yeah. So, and the thing is, I get asked this a lot because I've been divorced twice. I'm this little anomaly. People are like, how do I avoid being like you? You know, and I get it. I understand. With him, the tricky part is that because he's so good at covering things up, a lot of his family weren't aware either. And so that one is tricky because like even after the fact, like when we signed the papers and I went back home and like I flew back home and like a month or two later, his aunt had called me because he had moved in with her and she was like, what is going on? And like she's listing off all these issues and she's like, what the crap? And I'm like, girl, that's what I was dealing with for 3 years. And she's like, what? Like she had no idea. I think even his mom was pretty unaware of a lot of his issues and or maybe was in denial of them because I think she had some of her own like guilt and grief about the fact that her and her husband weren't together. And so she was feeling, I think she had some guilt about like how her children were treating their marriages based off of like what they watched her marriage be like. And so I think there might have been some denial with her about like what he was like. And in my church culture, we get married quickly and we get married younger. Like that's pretty common in my church culture. And so possibly if I had dated him longer, like maybe I would have seen some of those things. The problem is unless I like lived with him, which is not something that like I do in my faith, I wouldn't have known those things because he can hide them so well until you're like in his space. And so I wouldn't really have known. But I do think that like once I did get married and I saw some of those things right away with him like hiding things from me or like not honoring boundaries or not respecting like what I wanted my schedule, those if I had been in a healthy place were the first things I could have said like, oh, this is not good. Let's go. Like just be done then. But instead I lasted 3 years with him and he had cheated 3 months in. Like there was issues from the get-go and I still stayed for so long because again, with my church culture, it's like we marry forever. And it's like you made this promise. And so I was like, well, I promise forever and I'm sticking out forever. And while that's true, that's like what we teach, but it's not meant to be like, if you're being abused, you stay. Right. But that's what I interpret it as is like, well, it doesn't matter what he does to me. I have to stay. And so I know that's not healthy, but at the time that's what made sense to me. It was like, well, I made a promise. I promised forever. So no matter what he does, I got to figure this out and I have to try to fix it. I felt very like responsible for fixing our marriage and like making him want to be in the marriage. So I made it my job to like make our marriage better. But no matter what I did, there were still issues. So it took me a long time to come to the realization that like, I can't fix anybody. There's nothing I can do to make that better.
Okay. So leaving one marriage through abuse, how did you end up in a second marriage with abuse? Were the signs hidden or did you just overlook a lot of red flags?
That's valid. So I, like I said, I'd gone to therapy, like kind of the very end of my first marriage, and then like 8 months even after my first marriage. And he's like, "No, you're healthy, you're good." Like, so I kind of had this false sense of like, because I think I was better than I was when I first started. Like, there definitely was some growth and some healing, but like I mentioned before, like there wasn't really like this deeper dive into like why did I stay with him? Like, what was going on? Like, what are the patterns that I'm looking at? What are the the things that are leading me to these relationships, right? So we never really did any kind of dive into that, not until like my second marriage that I really start finding that out in therapy. And so one of them I think is that I still hadn't really healed my relationship with myself. I still didn't fully see like my value, and I got really swept up in my second husband has so many great qualities. Like to this day, I would tell you he has so many great qualities and he's wonderful in a lot of ways. I did kind of see some of his anger issues in the beginning, but I justified it as, well, nobody's perfect. And that's true. Nobody's perfect. And there isn't any one person who's going to have all the great qualities. But I know I've learned now that that doesn't mean you can like look aside to like an anger problem or, these things that maybe were kind of some red flags that I ignored them thinking this is one bad thing out of like 1,000 good qualities that he has.
We're here. No worries. Okay.
So yeah. So I mean, it really was a lot of like justifying that he had so many good qualities that, if I don't marry him over this one quote unquote problem, then I'm never going to get married. And so I justified that of, I love so many things about him and he has so many good qualities that I kind of overlooked the bigger issue. And even in the very beginning of our marriage, there was problems and, things that were going on that were really unhealthy. And I remember asking from the get-go, like, can we please go to therapy and like work through like our dynamics? Because I've done stuff for myself, but I recognize that there is dynamics here that aren't working and we're freshly married. So I'd really like to go take care of that now before it like gets any worse. And he refused to. And I mean, years down the road, like we were married for 7 years. Like way down the road, he started to kind of do some sessions with me, but it never really panned out well because my personal belief is that marriage counseling or marriage coaching is not going to work unless both parties are doing their own work. Because you step into a marriage counselor's office and like you need to talk about like the things that are pissing you off, the things you're hurt by, but you can't say it in front of them. One, if you're in a domestic abusive relationship, then that's going to cause more problems at home. That you've been speaking up and telling another person that this person's doing things that are not okay. So it's going to piss them off and it's going to hurt them. And I'm not looking to hurt him. I'm looking to heal my hurt. So if I go into a marriage counselor's office and I'm like, well, here's all the things he's doing and I'm so mad at him and blah, blah, blah. Like, or if he's saying those things about me, that hurts. So I do believe that people need to have their own separate counseling or like whatever their modality is for healing, to spend time there. And then they can come into like a group session that's like, hey, let's just work on our skill set. Let's work on communicating. Hey, this is what I'm trying to say to you. And the therapist helps you like navigate that. So we went a little bit, but it didn't really help because of those things. And I remember and my therapist, I think, was just not trauma informed, but I tried emailing him to be like, hey, here's these issues. And then he kind of like in our session was like, I don't remember how to explain this, but he like kind of got mad at me for like going outside the session to talk about stuff. I'm like, do you not understand that I'm not safe? I don't feel safe. So if I tell you these things and he gets pissed off, I'm paying for it later, not you. So I think there is a need for more mental health professionals to be trauma informed and to be aware of like these dynamics in an abusive relationship, that they're not going to say something in the moment because they don't feel safe to. So be willing to have a separate conversation with them because they need that space to feel safe and to be heard because they're not getting it in their marriage.
Absolutely. Now, obviously you guys were seeking professional help. But you're seeking outside help? Was any of that, to either your parents or your mom, and with them being emotionally kind of unavailable or emotionally inept themselves, what kind of, if any, what kind of, advice was given, what was their kind of stance on everything going on, not knowing in the background they're kind of the reason why you're here. So, did you, receive any, feedback from them during those transactions?
Yeah. And so, I mean, and that was one thing that I know that I contributed to the dysfunction of our marriage was oversharing with my family. And granted, it was because I felt so unheard in my marriage that I wanted to get heard somewhere. But it wasn't healthy because bringing them into it makes it worse and it makes it more unhealthy. And my family to this day has really not forgiven him. I doesn't feel like, like the way that if his name comes up, they're like, well, and so it creates a dynamic that's not healthy for anybody involved. It's not healthy for my family. It's not healthy for my marriage. But the problem was that I had no place to go to say, hey, this sucks and this isn't working and I'm not okay. And so the advice I got was like, not much advice. It was like, he's an idiot. Like they just complain about him, complain that he's blah, 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 and maybe ignore him or, say this back to him. It's like, it was a lot of defensive advice, like how to be defensive with him, which doesn't help. And I know that he was talking to his family about me and that caused a lot of dynamics too, because then I would go to family functions and feel embarrassed because I know that he's telling about our fights and it's all just yeah, it was not healthy to involve our families in that way. But that's all we need to do. But I know now that that is a dynamic that I contributed to like involve our families.
And that's what I tell people. Marriages, relationships is a no trusting passing zone. Don't bring anyone into it. It creates issue. I went the same. Well, mine was opposite. I didn't talk, and my ex had his whole family being negative, not telling the truth. So I understand where you feel and where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I want to ask, through the relationships, can you tell? You don't have to tell like which one if you want, because I know some things you don't want to give too much information about. But what are some of the forms of abuse that you go through? And when I say forms, emotionally, financially, sexually, physical.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'm glad you brought up financial because I think some people don't recognize that that is a type of abuse, that that is a type of power that especially the breadwinner can have over the caretaker. So I get that that's not always like the man's the breadwinner and the woman's the caretaker. So whether it's man or woman, the breadwinner can have over the caretaker is I have the money, so I have the power. So I definitely have experienced that in my life of like I'm the one that doesn't make the money. And so I'm the one that has to like be answered to this authoritarian figure of like, he's in charge, he's got the money. And so he can withhold that. He can use that to control. And so I definitely experienced some of that. And it was very painful and hard. And I didn't even realize until later that that is a type of abuse, to have that financial power over somebody, because it's all about control, right? Like if he has the control because he has the money, then he can control that about me. And yeah, so I mean, there definitely was also some sexual abuse in my life. I didn't know what date rape was when I was younger, like in my early 20s. I didn't know that was a thing. And not until like later in my life did my best friend be like, girl, that wasn't consensual. So that's not, that's rape. I was like, oh, wait, my boyfriend. She's like, doesn't matter, still rape. And so that was hard too. Like at the time, I didn't know why I felt so terrible until later to realize, oh, that's why it felt terrible, because I was violated. I didn't have consent. I didn't give him consent. And so that was difficult. There was also just other like sexual issues in my marriages where like there just was dynamics there that were not honoring like me or my boundaries. And that was also really painful and hard. There was definitely verbal abuse in like all of my relationships. And I remember one of them, they were screaming at me for so long. And I have a tendency to like shut down when I'm being screamed at. And I remember like sitting on this park bench and he was just screaming and screaming and getting so mad at me for, I don't remember what the problem was, like what the reason for him being mad was, but he was screaming at me. And I remember just like hunkering down on this bench and like trying to just like fold into myself and make myself so small to like disappear. I just wanted to disappear. And he just kept screaming and screaming and screaming. And he's like, why aren't you talking to me? I was like, I literally couldn't speak. It was hard for me, especially because I got yelled at a lot as a kid. And so that like really triggered back into like my childhood self of like, oh, if I just be small enough, they won't keep yelling at me. And so that was difficult. Think of the other, there wasn't a ton of physical abuse. There was some, not a lot, but a little bit. And I'm trying to think of the other types. I think that's all of them. But yeah, definitely, I think the most, what I would say is like verbal and emotional abuse of telling me that I'm stupid, telling me that I'm a bad mom, telling me that I'm not worth anything, or that there's more bad than good about me, or, you know, I'd stop watching porn if you lost weight. Like just a lot of like mean, cutting, awful things that were calculated to make me feel bad. And again, going back to the control piece, I think that, and I could be wrong, but I feel like a lot of abuse is about controlling the other person, because there's something that gives them to feel control over their partner. So there's definitely a lot of that going on.
Absolutely.
I think Sid might have glitched
No,
us.
I'm here.
Sid.
No, I said
Okay.
I'm sorry. I messaged you, and you should probably get to your question before I get to mine.
Okay. Okay, sure thing. So Annie, we want to thank you because we're almost at time. So we always like to ask, what advice can you give the audience on strategies that helped you heal or to start that journey to heal? What are some things that you could recommend to the audience from your personal life experiences that could help them?
That's a beautiful question. I would say that the most powerful thing I've done, and it's all helpful, right? Like energy work and coaching and therapy and all the things, like they're all so powerful. But at the end of the day, what helped me the most and what I would give advice to anybody else is to learn how to actually love myself, to stop beating myself up and to learn to love myself, to change the narrative in my head because it was an ugly place in there. I was beating myself up for everything I did. If I turned the wrong way on the street, I would for the next 15 minutes like go off about how stupid I am and how could I have done that and whatever. And it feels automatic. I totally get that. It took a long time for me to accept that this is changeable. I thought this was just automatic. This is just what I do and this is what my brain does. Until I learned some tools of like, nope, this is not truth. This is just what I believe. And I think that that's powerful to understand that belief does not always equal truth. That just because you believe it doesn't make it true. And if you say the belief out loud, like I'm stupid, does that feel good? Does that feel right in your soul? I actually have this camp I do for kids. Like I'll do events for women and I also do camps for kids. And I often tell them like, take a thought or a belief and say, is it helping me or is it hurting me? If it's hurting you, let it go. You don't have to believe it anymore. You have a choice. I promise you, if you're listening right now and you're like, well, that's cute for you, Annie, but like I really am stupid or I really am ugly. I really am whatever. I promise you that if it doesn't feel good in your body, it's not true. And you can let it go. I promise you, you can because I did it. I'm still working on it. I'm still growing. I'm still healing. And I don't think my journey of healing is ever going to be done. But I know that I'm so much farther along than I was before because I'm learning to release the lies. I'm not stupid. I am amazing and I'm smart and I am wonderful. And thinking those things is not, it's not cockiness. It is not narcissism to love yourself, to be kind to yourself. And that's where I like to focus on is like, it's not just, oh, self-love gets talked about all the time. But it's like, you be kind to yourself. You wouldn't talk to a friend the way you talk in your head. I guarantee you wouldn't. So write down all the things that are in your head and take a look at it. Is it helping you? Is it hurting you? If it's hurting, let it go. It's not true anyway. Because I can approach a problem and say, oh man, you know what? I made a mistake because I'm a human being and I love me anyway. And then I move on and I can learn from the mistake instead of wasting all my energy beating myself up. That doesn't help anybody anyway. If I can lovingly say, oh, girl, that didn't work. That did not work. So let's try something different next time. That's a whole different ball game than like, well, I'm the worst and no one loves me and blah, blah, blah. Because like I said before, no one's coming to save you. You are your own hero. You have to love you. Nothing outside of you will change it except for you. I tried for 38 years to let other people's opinions be the thing that fixed the bullet hole. Those are all Band-Aids. None of them will stay. Until you heal the wound and love yourself, nothing outside of you will make a difference. You are worthy of love just because you're you. I promise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wise words. Now, we do like to take this part or the last few minutes of our podcast here to do what's called shameless post or shameless plug, excuse me. And you do see your banner scrolling across the screen there. You can let our viewers know where they can contact you, how they can utilize their services, draw traffic to any event or cause that you need. Just pretty much how the viewers can get in contact, and you have the floor.
I love it. Thank you so much. So my website is anniejoy.com, and there's multiple ways to reach out to me there. Or if you're on Facebook, I'm Annie Joy Carter on there. Instagram, the handle is anniejoy.speaks. And I do have an event coming up on November 4th in Gilbert, Arizona. I don't know if any of your listeners are in Arizona or if you know someone in Arizona, but we are doing a mother-daughter event to help our mamas show their daughters how to speak up, how to love themselves, how to have more connection in their lives, because I know that it's the mamas who teach their daughters. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and every day I'm showing her what it looks like to be a woman who loves herself and who speaks up for herself. So those are ways you can get a hold of me. There's also, like, my email is hello@anniejoy.com. Feel free to reach out, even if you just have questions. Like, if you're not looking to work with a life coach yet, you just want to talk and like ask some questions, I'm always happy to answer questions. So please feel free to reach out. Come hang out on social media. It's a pretty good time over there. I'm a little crazy and fun, but it's a good time.
Love it. Thank you so much, Annie. We really appreciate your testimony and sharing it on Unfiltered, Unspoken's platform. It is definitely an honor for Sid and I to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much. You guys are amazing, and I just love what you're doing, and I hope that we can reach more women to make sure they feel like they can also be unfiltered and unspoken. I love it. You guys are amazing.
Amen to that. And I'm going to also add in the men that are going through abuse and the youth that are
Yes.
going through abuse. We want to
Yes.
touch all of those areas as well, because so
Yes.
many folks are silent, and it's humans like Annie that shares testimonies that helps connect that inner healing piece to let you know that you are going through a trauma and you do have the space to heal.
Right. And you're worthy of healing. You are worthy of the time it takes to heal. Absolutely.
Amen. I would agree to that. Well, we're at time, and we want to thank everyone for tuning in to Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast, where we're going to continue to share life experiences of others in hopes that you will start the journey to healing. And if you didn't learn anything from Annie today, heal those wounds. If it doesn't feel right, you're hurting. So be truthful to yourself during your healing journey and through your healing journey. And there are a lot of key things that we heard Annie disclose, and that was accountability and forgiveness. Though I always tell folks those are the two biggest things to starting the journey to healing, is taking accountability and forgiving. And as you've seen on this episode, Annie did those two things and more. So we want to thank you for tuning in to Unfiltered Unspoken, and we will see you again Sunday at 7 p.m. ET with another testimony, and then another testimony and another testimony. Have a blessed day.